If you've ever found yourself swinging between working insane hours back to back to back and then avoiding everything for 3 days in a row, you're not broken, you're just stuck in the ADHD all or nothing trap. So one of the many challenges that the ADHD brain can be fixating on is how we vacillate between like getting more done than most people can do in like a 1 hour period to getting absolutely nothing done for hours and hours and hours upon end. And it can end up being incredibly frustrating until we start to learn a little bit more about how our brains function and why that is happening. Now, I do want to preface this real quick is that for my ladies out there, if you are a woman dealing with ADHD, there is a whole extra level of complication to this, and that is the hormone swings that happen throughout your cycle, throughout the month. So as you have estrogen and progesterone spiking or decreasing, it is going to change your ability to basically process. You have about a week of like feeling like superwoman, and then you can also have like 2 weeks in a row of feeling like everything is an uphill slog. Now, we're not going to get into all of that in this video exactly, but I do want to make sure that you're aware, if you are a woman, your body is actively cycling through phases that may be impacting you here. So in general, as a rule of thumb, for ADHDers, why do we struggle so much with regulation? Well, if you've watched any of our videos, if you've watched most videos on ADHD as a whole, one of the biggest challenges that the ADHD brain deals with from a neurobiology perspective is dopamine regulation. That leads to varying senses of urgency, varying senses of motivation, varying senses of memory. So quick overview of why the ADHD brain may struggle with this all or nothing mentality. As a rule of thumb, if you have watched any videos on ADHD, you know that one of the biggest challenges that we deal with repeatedly is this dopamine regulation issue. So the ADHD brain versus the neuronormie brain. In a neuronormie brain, you have basically a really smooth road for the dopamine to travel on. You have a normal number of dopamine receptors. You have a normal factory producing dopamine. And in the ADHD brain, it's not nearly such a smooth road. You tend to have an increase in dopamine receptors, and your factory isn't producing nearly enough. So not only does your brain think you need more, it does need more, it's not getting more. And that leads to an impact across our ability to focus, our ability to stay motivated, our ability to retain information. It's a whole like slew of things. And one of the most important things to recognize is that it's not necessarily a laziness issue. It is oftentimes just a mismatch in energy patterns and expectations. It's about understanding when our brain is able to be in that high performance mode and when it's not, and learning when it's time to have grace with ourselves versus when it is time to push ourselves and say, hey, we got to try and make something happen regardless. So what tends to happen for the ADHD individual when it comes to this all or nothing cycle? Well, we tend to go from a place of hyperfocus to burnout to avoidance to panic, back to hyperfocus, and just loop through the whole thing over and over and over again. A lot of times that hyperfocus does tend to coincide with something going on that makes that dopamine production not only a little bit higher, but also has it getting to our receptors. And so our brain is able to like trigger a higher level of executive function and a higher level of focus. And if you've done any studies of flow state, you know that flow state has this cycle called rest. And without that rest portion, we can't get back into the flow state. Well, the ADHD brain is very much the same. Most high achievers understand that this is going to be part of the cycle, and they also understand that it's okay to have grace with yourself when you're in the rest period, because that is the period that allows you to be in hyperfocus and production, rather than letting that moment of rest destroy your consistency and self-trust because you feel that you are failing. You've gone from getting everything done to getting nothing done. So what's the difference between these high achievers and the individuals who are struggling a little bit more? Let's break that down. One of the biggest things that most high achievers are able to hold on to, even inside of their rest phase, is a minimum viable effort. So the minimum viable effort is small actions that will build momentum without necessarily requiring full energy. These are having little things that you do hold yourself accountable to do and to accomplish, even on the days you don't necessarily feel like doing and accomplishing all of the things, because all of the things is just too much. This may be something like, hey, I clear my inbox back to 0 every single day. That is my minimum viable effort, because I know that once I get into like hyper focus and getting things done mode, then it's not as difficult for me to keep that going or get into it in the first place. And the nice thing about having a minimum viable effort task, or a handful of them that you have built in as your baseline of these are the things I will do, even on days I'm not necessarily feeling like doing all the things, like that starts to create these tiny little dopamine boosts without necessarily needing a crisis. It also starts to help your brain like understand that, hey, even in the downtimes, there is still some dopamine to be had. Now, this is where I say, like, this is up to you to make these decisions, because you're the one who's going to need to decide, am I in a place where I need to give myself complete rest and like even like say, hey, minimum viable effort for a day, not a big deal. We're gonna let that one go. Or am I at a place where maybe I've been in this like doing minimum viable effort but nothing else for a little while, and now I need to make myself like actually go do some more stuff here? Do I need to like push myself to get back into my minimum viable effort activities because I've had 3 days in a row of not even stressing about that? Being ADHD means there's a constant give and take and a constant balance that we have to ride the line of pushing ourselves, yes, because as I remind my team constantly, ADHD is a reason, not an excuse. This does not get to be the, well, I didn't do it because of my ADHD. It needs to be like, hey, it didn't happen because of the ADHD because the dopamine wasn't there. So I'm gonna put XYZ in place to make sure I'm giving myself dopamine boosts even when I'm in a down period. And look, these could be really, really simple things like check-ins. You could have a 3-step check-in that you do where even if the answers are, I'm not in a good place today, you still like do the check-in because you're holding yourself accountable to that minimum viable effort. These could be start-only goals where you say, hey, I need to get here, but for the next couple of days, I know I'm not gonna get here. I'm just gonna start with this start only. For example, I had a goal that I was working on for like a week and a half of getting this landing page up for our new event, the Reflect. And it just kept getting pushed and kept getting pushed. And what I realized was that I needed to break it down into the start only. And so I made a goal that all I had to do was go in and get the content loaded. I didn't have to format it. I didn't have to choose the section designs. I didn't have to do any of the pictures. I didn't have to do any of that stuff. All I had to do was just get the content loaded to the page. And then I could go in and start making it pretty and reevaluating and figuring out what it was that was bugging me about it instead of feeling like I had to get the whole thing done in one go. One of the big things we keep coming back to every single time we talk about ADHD is something that we talk about on the ADHD iOS channel quite a bit, is this idea that your ADHD isn't necessarily a flaw and it isn't necessarily a superpower either. A lot of times ADHD success, or success for individuals with ADHD, comes from understanding our rhythms and our cycles and how our brain functions. If you have ADHD or you think you have ADHD, there is a lot of value in learning how your brain works so that you can then learn how to work with your brain. You can create a rhythm and a cycle and space that allows your brain to be its best version. So if you're in a place where you'd like to start learning a little bit more about your ADHD brain, we do a lot of those videos here on this channel. We also do a lot of those videos over on the ADHD iOS channel, which is all about understanding your internal operating system. Go ahead and like and follow this one, and then go ahead and look up the iOS and like and follow that one too.